The studio lights burned hot, and the audience buzzed with unease. Bill Maher leaned back in his chair, his smirk sharp as a blade. Across from him sat Jasmine Crockett, her eyes locked on his, unyielding. The air crackled with bad blood. This wasn't just another episode of his talk show. It was a battlefield, and neither planned to leave without a fight. Maher had invited Crockett to discuss her recent push for healthcare reform, but everyone knew he'd lured her here to tear her down. He'd been sniping at her for weeks, calling her ideas naive, her passion a performance. Crockett wasn't here to play nice. She'd come to bury him. Maher started with a jab. "So, Jasmine, your big plan to fix healthcare. Sounds like a fairy tale. You really think you can sell this to people who don't trust a word politicians say?" His voice dripped with scorn, and the audience tittered. Crockett's jaw tightened, but she didn't flinch. She'd heard worse. She'd grown up in a world that doubted her at every turn, and she'd clawed her way to this seat. She wasn't about to let some smug host unravel her. "Bill, you'd know about fairy tales," she shot back, her voice low but venomous. "You've been peddling cynicism for years, acting like you're above it all. But you're not. You're just another guy who thinks he's smarter than everyone else." The audience gasped, then fell silent. Maher's smirk faltered, but only for a second. He leaned forward, eyes narrowing. He wasn't used to being challenged like this, not on his own turf. "You want to talk smart?" he snapped. "Your plan's a pipe dream. You're promising free health care like it grows on trees. You think taxpayers are going to foot the bill for your little utopia?" He waved a hand, dismissing her. The crowd murmured, some nodding, others shifting uncomfortably. Crockett's hands gripped the arms of her chair. She could feel the weight of every eye in the room, every ear waiting for her to crack. But she hadn't come to lose. "Taxpayers?" she said, her voice rising, sharp enough to cut glass. "You mean the people you mock every week? The ones you call idiots for believing in anything? I'm fighting for them, Bill. You're just fighting for your ego." The words landed like a slap, and the audience erupted in cheers and jeers. Maher's face reddened. He'd underestimated her, and it stung. He'd brought her here to expose her as a lightweight, but she was turning the tables. The argument had started over policy, but it was personal now. Years ago, Maher had endorsed a rival of Crockett's in a local election, calling her unelectable in a throwaway comment that had haunted her early career. She'd never forgotten it. That betrayal fueled her fire tonight. She saw Maher's ambition, his need to be the loudest voice in the room, and she was done letting him win. He, meanwhile, saw her as a threat to his carefully crafted image. She was too real, too fierce, and he hated it. Maher tried to pivot, tossing out a laugh to cool the tension. "All right, Jasmine, you're scrappy. I'll give you that. But let's be real. You're pushing a fantasy, and deep down, you know it." He leaned back, smug again, thinking he'd regained control. Crockett didn't blink. She was ready to strike harder. This wasn't just about healthcare anymore. It was about who got to define the truth, who got to be heard, and she wasn't backing down. The stage vibrated with their clash, and the audience was hooked. Crockett leaned forward, her voice steady but blazing. "You call it a fantasy because you're scared, Bill. Scared of anyone who actually believes in something. You hide behind jokes, but I see you. You're not smarter than me. You're just louder." The crowd roared, some leaping to their feet. Maher's eyes flashed with fury. He wasn't laughing anymore. He'd wanted a debate, but Crockett had brought a war. The fight was only beginning, and the studio felt like it might combust. Crockett had drawn first blood, but Maher wasn't done. He'd built his career on cutting people down, and he wasn't about to let her walk away victorious. The next round was coming, and it would be brutal. The cameras kept rolling, capturing every second of the firestorm. Maher adjusted his tie, trying to mask his irritation, but his eyes betrayed him. They burned with the need to reclaim his throne. He'd invited Crockett to his show thinking he'd toy with her, expose her as just another politician with big talk and no substance. But she'd flipped the script, and now he was the one scrambling. The audience, still buzzing from her last jab, waited for his counterattack. He couldn't let her words linger, couldn't let her paint him as a coward. "Scared?" Maher said, his voice sharp, slicing through the noise. "That's rich, coming from someone who's banking on fairy dust to fix a broken system. You're not a hero, Jasmine. You're a dreamer who's gonna crash hard." He pointed at her, his finger jabbing the air. The crowd split, some cheering his boldness, others hissing. Crockett's face didn't waver, but inside, her anger surged. She'd spent years fighting for respect, and here was Maher, dismissing her like she was nothing. "You think you know broken?" she fired back, her voice like steel. "I've seen people lose everything because they couldn't afford a doctor. I've sat with them, heard their stories. You? You sit here cracking jokes, acting like their pain's a punchline." Her words hit hard, and the audience gasped. A few clapped, their hands trembling with emotion. Crockett wasn't just debating. She was channeling years of frustration, of being underestimated, of being betrayed by people like Maher, who thought they owned the stage. Maher's lips twisted into a sneer. He hated being called out, especially on his own show. He'd spent decades building his brand as the guy who spoke truth, no matter who it hurt. But Crockett was stripping that away, exposing his ambition as selfishness, his wit as cruelty. "Oh, spare me the sob stories," he said, rolling his eyes. "You're not saving the world. You're just another politician fishing for votes, with promises you can't keep." His tone was vicious, meant to wound. Crockett's eyes narrowed. She could feel the old wound reopening, the sting of Maher's long-ago slight when he'd backed her rival, called her a nobody. That moment had pushed her to fight harder, to prove him wrong, but it still burned. Now she saw her chance to settle the score. "You're wrong, Bill," she said, her voice low, dangerous. "I'm not fishing for anything. I'm building something. And you? You're just tearing it down because you can't stand someone else getting the spotlight." The audience erupted again, louder this time. Maher's face tightened. He wasn't used to losing control, and Crockett was unraveling. Him. He'd planned to make her look foolish, but she was making him look small. His ambition, his need to be the moral arbiter, was crumbling under her fire. He tried to laugh it off, but it came out forced. "Building something?" he mocked. "You're building a house of cards and it's gonna fall. Mark my words." Crockett didn't flinch. She leaned closer, her voice cutting through his bluster. "Keep talking, Bill. Every word you say just shows how empty you are. You think you're untouchable, but you're not. I'm here, and I'm not going anywhere." The crowd roared, feeding off her defiance. Maher's smirk was gone now, replaced by a scowl. He'd underestimated her, and it was costing him. The tension was suffocating, the studio a pressure cooker. The producers in the control room exchanged nervous glances. This wasn't the show they'd planned. It was raw, unscripted, and dangerous. Crockett had turned Maher's stage into her platform, and he was fighting to take it back. The audience could feel the shift, the power tilting toward her. But Maher wasn't finished. He'd been in tougher spots before, and he knew how to play dirty. As the segment break loomed, Maher leaned back, plotting his next move. He'd let her have this round, let her think she was winning. But he was ready to hit below the belt, to drag up something that would rattle her. Crockett, sensing his shift, braced herself. She'd come too far to let him knock her down. The war was far from over, and the next blow would shake the room. The commercial break hit, but the energy didn't fade. The audience whispered, their voices a low hum of shock and excitement. Crockett sipped water, her hands steady, but her mind raced. She knew Maher was regrouping, planning something nasty. She'd seen his type before, men who thrived on control, who'd rather burn everything down than lose. But she was ready. She'd built her career on moments like this, on proving she was tougher than the toughest. Maher, meanwhile, was seething. His producer whispered in his earpiece, urging him to dial it back, but he waved them off. He wasn't about to let Crockett steal his show. He'd invited her here to expose her, to prove he was still the king of hard truths. But she'd turned it into a referendum on him, and the audience was eating it up. His ambition, his need, to be seen as the ultimate authority, was under siege. He had to hit her where it hurt. When the cameras came back on, Maher didn't waste time. "Welcome back," he said, his voice smooth but laced with malice. "Jasmine, let's talk about trust. You're out there preaching hope, but didn't you once promise your voters a tax cut you couldn't deliver? Kinda shaky for a savior, don't you think?" The jab was low, digging up a minor misstep from her early days. He'd done his homework, and he wanted her to squirm. Crockett's eyes flashed, but she didn't hesitate. "Nice try, Bill," she said, her voice steady, slicing. "You want to talk trust? How about the time you trashed an entire movement just to get laughs? You called good people fools because it got you ratings." She was referring to a years-old episode where Maher had mocked a grassroots campaign she'd supported. The audience murmured, sensing the history, the betrayal. Crockett wasn't just defending herself. She was exposing his moral superiority as a sham. Maher's face darkened. He hadn't expected her to go there, to drag up his past so boldly. "That's cute," he snapped. "But you're deflecting. You screwed up, Jasmine. Own it. Or is that too real for you?" He leaned forward, his voice dripping with contempt. The crowd shifted, some nodding with him, others glaring. He was trying to paint her as a fraud, to reclaim his moral high ground, but Crockett was done playing defense. "Real?" she said, her voice rising, fierce. "I'm realer than you'll ever be. I fight for people who've got nothing. You fight for applause. You betrayed anyone who ever believed in you, Bill, because you think you're above them." The words were a blade, cutting deep. The audience exploded, some cheering, others shouting. Maher's mask slipped, his anger raw. He'd wanted to break her, but she was breaking him. The studio was chaos now, the line between debate and brawl blurring. Crockett's ambition, her refusal to be silenced, was a force Maher couldn't contain. She'd turned his attack into her triumph, using his own tactics against him. But he wasn't out yet. He still had one card to play, one last chance to flip the narrative. He leaned back, his eyes cold, calculating. The audience held its breath, waiting for the next strike. Crockett felt the shift, saw the glint in his eyes. She knew he was about to go for the kill, but she wasn't afraid. She'd faced worse than him, and she'd come out stronger every time. This was her moment, and she was ready to seize it. The studio was a powder keg, and Maher was ready to light the fuse. His last jab hadn't landed like he'd hoped. Crockett had turned it against him, and the audience was swaying her way. He could feel his grip on the show slipping, his image as the untouchable truth-teller cracking. He'd built his career on being the guy who could outtalk anyone, but Crockett was relentless. Her ambition, her refusal to bow, was dismantling him. He had to go big or go down. "Jasmine," he said, his voice low, venomous, "you talk a big game about fighting for people. But let's cut the act. You're in this for yourself. Always have been. I heard you pushed out a colleague to get your seat. That's not a hero. That's a shark." The accusation was a lie, twisted from a rumor he'd dug up. He didn't care about the truth. He just wanted to see her falter, to smear her moral superiority. The audience gasped. The air sucked out of the room. Crockett's face froze, but only for a moment. The lie stung, not because it was true, but because it was the kind of attack she'd faced her whole career. Men like Maher, cloaked in their ambition, always tried to paint her as ruthless, as less. But she wasn't here to crumble. She was here to conquer. "You're pathetic, Bill," she said, her voice calm but deadly. "You've got nothing, so you make it up. I earned my place. I fought for it, fair and square. You've been coasting on lies and cheap shots for years." She leaned forward, her eyes boring into his. "You want to talk sharks? Look in the mirror. You'd sell out anyone for a headline." The crowd roared, their cheers shaking the studio. Crockett's words weren't just a defense. They were an indictment. Maher's jaw clenched. He'd thrown his best punch, and she'd dodged it, hitting back harder. The audience was hers now, their energy feeding her fire. He tried to interrupt, but she didn't let him. "I'm not done," she said, her voice commanding, silencing him. "You think you can drag me down because I'm not afraid to fight? That's your mistake. I'm not here for your approval. I'm here for the people you've forgotten." The room exploded again, the sound deafening. Maher was cornered, his ambition exposed as petty, his moral superiority shattered. He'd betrayed his own image, revealing himself as the bully he'd always denied being. The audience saw it, and they were done with him. Crockett stood tall, her defiance a beacon. She'd turned his stage into her victory, and there was no coming back for him. The final moments of the show were electric. Maher tried to wrap up, his voice flat, defeated. "Well, folks, that's all we've got time for," he said, but no one was listening. The crowd was on its feet, chanting Crockett's name. She didn't smile, didn't gloat. She just looked at Maher, her eyes saying everything. She'd won not by playing his game, but by rewriting the rules. As the credits rolled, the studio was still buzzing. Crockett walked off the set, her head high, her fire unbroken. Maher sat alone, the lights dimming around him. He'd invited her to destroy her, but she'd destroyed him instead. The audience would talk about this for years, the night Jasmine. Crockett shocked the world with a comeback that left Bill Maher speechless. Her triumph was complete, her victory undeniable.